She came around the bend in the road at a pace that was not quite running and not quite anything else, the particular gait of a woman who had decided something irrevocable and was putting distance between herself and it before she could reconsider. No coat, no bag, nothing in her hands but the decision itself, which she was holding with both of them, even though it was invisible. Even though anyone watching would have seen only a woman moving fast down a mountain road in the October cold, with her breath coming hard and her jaw set and her eyes on the ground 12 feet ahead of her. The man and his horse were stopped at the fork where the South Road met the Bitterroot Trail, and she nearly walked into the horse before she saw it. She stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. The horse expressed no opinion. He took in the no coat, the empty hands, the pace she had been keeping, and the particular quality of her face, which was the face of a woman who had been through something recent and had not yet had time to put it behind glass. He said, "Stay. If you have ever been on a road with nothing behind you worth going back to, and nothing ahead of you yet decided, subscribe to this channel right now and drop the name of your city in the comments below." I want to know how far this story travels tonight, because the woman who nearly walked into a stranger's horse on the Bitterroot Road in October of 1883 does not know yet why he said it. Neither does he entirely. Stay with me while they both find out. Her name was Cora Beale. She was 27 years old, and she had been the working spine of the Beale family ranch outside of Cutter Creek, Montana. Since her mother died 11 years ago, and she had stepped into the gap her mother left without being asked, and without being thanked, and without, for 11 years, being offered anything in return except the understanding that this was what family did. She was not a small woman. She had her father's height and her mother's breadth, and she had spent 11 years doing the work of 2 people in a kitchen and a yard and a range and a ledger room. And her body showed the competence and the cost of that in equal measure. The men of Cutter Creek looked at her the way men looked at useful things, with a regard that was entirely conditional on what she produced, and entirely uninterested in what she was. She had accepted this for 11 years, because acceptance was what the situation offered, and she was not a woman who spent energy on what could not be changed. What had changed on a Tuesday morning in October was everything at once. The man's name was Hargrove. He had arrived at the ranch in a good coat with a leather case and the expression of a man conducting a transaction he found entirely routine, and he had introduced himself as the representative of Mr. Douglas Fenn of Billings, the new owner of the Beale family ranch and all its appurtenances, effective the 1st of November. He had used the word appurtenances. He had opened the leather case and produced the bill of sale, which bore her father's signature and her brother Cal's signature and a date 3 weeks prior, and he had begun to describe the terms of the transition, which included a provision in the 8th paragraph of the agreement for the retention of existing domestic staff at the current rate of room and board. She had asked him to stop. She had asked him to show her the 8th paragraph. She had read it. She had read it twice. Then she had set the document on the kitchen table and walked to the door and out of it. And she had not stopped walking. She had not gone back for her coat, because going back meant going into a house that was no longer hers and had possibly never been hers, and she found, in the moment, that she could not. Her father was in the barn when she passed it. She had seen him through the gap in the door, moving between the stalls with the unhurried confidence of a man who had concluded a piece of business and had nothing troubling his conscience about it. She had not stopped. He had not called after her. Either he had not seen her, or he had decided not to see her, and she had found, somewhere in the 50 yards between the barn and the road, that she could not determine which of those was worse, and that it did not matter. She had been walking for 40 minutes when she came around the bend. The man at the fork was perhaps 35, lean and dark, with the weathered, particular face of someone who spent most of his time outdoors in country that had opinions. He was sitting his horse with the relaxed verticality of a man comfortable in a saddle, and when she stopped he did not move, and his eyes, grey and direct and giving nothing away in the way of surprise or alarm, simply looked at her the way she might look at a problem, with attention, without judgment, trying to understand what she was dealing with. He said, "Stay, not wait. Not are you all right, not where are you going. Stay," as though she were a person who had somewhere to stay and had perhaps temporarily forgotten it. She looked at him. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he said. Holt Vane. "I run a place on the North Fork." He said it as identification, not as argument. He did not move from the saddle. He let the silence do what it would. She looked at the road behind her, which was empty, and the road ahead of her, which went down to Cutter Creek and the stage stop, and after that, somewhere she had not decided. She had 40 cents in her apron pocket. She had no coat. She had the beginning of a cold that she had been managing for 3 days, and which was going to become an earnest problem by nightfall if she stayed in the October air without wool. She looked back at the man on the horse. "Why?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at her in the specific way he had been looking at her since she came around the bend. Not assessment, not the usual travelling measurement she was accustomed to. Something more considered. "Because you came around that bend like a woman who had just found out something she cannot unknow," he said, "and you don't have a coat, and there is nothing in Cutter Creek that is going to fix the kind of thing that makes a person leave without a coat." She looked at him. "I have a position open," he said. "Housekeeper. I've had it open since spring, and I haven't filled it, because the women who answered the advertisement were looking for something the North Fork doesn't offer, which is other people." He settled slightly in the saddle. "I can't pay you today. I can give you a meal and a roof and a reason to stop walking in the cold, and we can discuss the arrangement tomorrow when you've had some sleep." She was quiet for a long moment. The horse shifted its weight. A wind came down off the high peaks with the smell of snow behind it. "I'm not looking for charity," she said. "I know it," he said. "I'm looking for someone who can run a house and manage stores and keep books." The advertisement said as much. He looked at her hands, which she had been using for 11 years in exactly those capacities. "Can you do those things?" "Yes," she said. "Then it's not charity," he said. "It's an interview." She looked at the road to Cutter Creek one more time. 40 cents and no coat and 3 days into a cold on a mountain road in October. She made the accounting the way she had always made it, plainly, without sentiment, accepting what the numbers said. She turned back to him. "I'll need a horse," she said. He reached back without a word, untied the lead rope of the second horse she now noticed was tethered to his saddle, and handed it down to her. She mounted without assistance. They rode north. The homestead on the North Fork was 4 miles up a road that required the horse to have opinions about footing, and when they arrived the light was going and the cold had become earnest. The cabin was larger than she had expected and better built than she had hoped. Solid logs, tight chinking, a covered porch that ran the length of the front, a stone chimney doing its job with commitment. The yard was organised in the way of a man who knew where things needed to be and had put them there. Wood piles stacked and covered, tools racked in the lean-to. The kitchen garden gone to dry stalks at season's end, but laid out with enough sense that she could see what it had been and what it could become. He took both horses to the barn. She stood on the porch for a moment alone and looked at the mountains going dark above the tree line, and felt the strange, suspended quality of standing somewhere new. Not the anticipated new of a plan made and executed, but the accidental new of a road and a horse and a word said by a stranger. She had nowhere behind her to return to. She had this porch in front of her. She went inside. The kitchen was the kitchen of a man who could feed himself and had reduced the operation to its most functional form. The stove was clean and serviceable. The stores were adequate: cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, coffee, a crock of lard. No fresh vegetables, which was what the season explained, but she had already noted the kitchen garden's bones and had plans for the spring. What the kitchen lacked was the evidence of any recent intention beyond basic sustenance: one plate, one cup, one pot, an iron skillet that had been used and cleaned so many times it held the record of years in its surface. She found a second cup on the high shelf. She made coffee. He came in from the barn and found it on the table and looked at it and then at her, and whatever he had been preparing to say reorganized itself. He sat down. She sat across from him. They drank the coffee in the fading light without talking, and the silence was not uncomfortable, which told her something. Silences told her things. She had been reading them for 11 years. The position, she said finally. What does it pay? $35 a month and room and board, he said. The room is the loft. It's warmer than it looks. What happened to the last person in the position? He looked at his cup. There hasn't been one. I've run this place alone for 3 years. He turned the cup once on the table. I told you the advertisement hadn't been answered usefully. That's true. I may not have been looking for it to be. She looked at him. But you stopped on the road. Yes, he said. Why? She said again. He was quiet for a moment in the way of a man who has the answer and is deciding how much of it to give. My wife left this place, he said, in the second winter. Not because of anything I did, or not only that. Because the North Fork is what it is, and she found it was more than she could make her peace with. He looked at the window. She walked down that road in January with a bag, and I watched her go, and I did not stop her. Because stopping her would have been keeping her somewhere she could not be. His jaw moved once. I have thought since then that stopping was the wrong word, that what I should have said was stay, not as a command, but as an invitation, as a question. Give it another day. Give me the chance to show you what this place is when you know it. He looked back at her. I never said it to her. I said it to you because you were on the same road and you had the same look, and I am not going to make the same mistake twice. The fire held. Outside, the wind was making good on the smell of snow it had been promising since afternoon. That is an honest answer, Cora said. I try to be, he said. Your wife, she said. Do you know where she went? Colorado, he said. She wrote once, from Denver. She sounded well. He said it without bitterness, without performance. The plain report of a man who had made his peace with a fact that had cost him something and was not going to pretend it had not. I hope she is. Cora looked at the table. She thought about her father in the barn. She thought about the 8th paragraph and the word appurtenances and the leather case and Hargrove's routine expression. She thought about 11 years of a kitchen and a yard and a ledger room, all of it given without return, all of it taken without acknowledgement. My family sold the ranch, she said. 3 weeks ago. Without telling me, she said it plainly, the way she had been saying plain things all her life to people who did not always hear them. There was a provision in the sale for my continued domestic labour at the new owner's discretion. I found out this morning from the buyer's representative. She looked at her hands. I left. He was quiet for a long moment. Without a coat, he said. Without a coat, she said. Your father signed the document. And my brother. He said nothing for a moment. Then, I'm sorry. She looked up. Not because you left, he said. because they made it something you had to leave from. She held his eyes. There was nothing in them of pity. She knew pity. She had been offered it periodically by the women of Cutter Creek and had found it less useful than a sharp knife. What was in them was the recognition she had felt on the road, the look of a man who understood the specific geometry of a situation without requiring it to be explained. She looked back at the table. "I'll take the position," she said. "All right," he said. She slept 12 hours. She woke to the smell of her own coffee. She had set it up the night before from habit, and dressed, and came down from the loft to find him already gone to the range. A note on the table in a hand that was small and deliberate. "Make yourself at home." She stood with the note for a moment. Make yourself at home. She had not been at home anywhere in 11 years. She had been useful. She had been present. She had been managed and assumed and included in the inventory, apparently, of a property sale. She had not been at home. She put the note in her apron pocket and went to find the root cellar key. The work took her shape the way work always took her shape. She moved through it with the competence of a woman who had been doing this since 16 and had developed over the years a relationship with domestic management that was not servitude but craft. She found what the kitchen had and what it lacked and made the list in her head and assessed what could be done with what was there and began doing it. And by noon, the cabin had a different quality than it had the night before. Something warmer and more inhabited, the change that happened in a space when someone brought their full attention to it. She found the ledger books in the evening. He had 3 of them, one for the cattle, one for the timber rights he leased on the North Slope, one that appeared to be a general household account. She opened the household account and read the last 6 months of it with the practiced eye of a woman who had kept books for 11 years, and what she found was a man who tracked his expenses with precision and his income with accuracy, and had, in the last several months, been spending slightly more than he was earning in a pattern that was not yet alarming but would become so before spring. She did not mention it that evening. She set the ledger back where she had found it and served supper, and ate across from him in the now established silence that was comfortable in the way that silences were comfortable between people who did not require noise to fill space. On the 3rd day, she mentioned the ledger. He looked up from his coffee. "The household account," she said. "The last quarter. You're carrying a deficit that's going to catch you before the spring timber payment comes in." She had the book open to the relevant pages. If you shift the supply orders to the Billings Consolidator instead of the Cutter Creek Merchant, the freight difference saves you $4 a month. And the cattle account has an entry in August I can't reconcile, a payment to a man named Aldis that doesn't have a corresponding service record. He looked at the entry. He looked at her. "Aldis sold me a bull that died in September," he said. "I haven't recorded the loss yet." "Record it," she said. "And write to Aldis about a partial return on the sale price. A bull dead in 30 days has a warranty argument behind it if you want to make one." He stared at her for a moment with the expression she had seen on his face on the road, the particular attention of a man who has found something he was not expecting and is trying to account for it. "You've been keeping books," he said. "Since I was 16, she said. "My father couldn't be trusted with the numbers." She closed the ledger. "I'm not trying to overstep the position." "You're not," he said. "You're not." He looked at the closed ledger. "Write to Aldis." She wrote to Aldis. Aldis sent back $40 and an apology, because the bull had been sold with a known condition that Aldis had chosen not to mention, and he understood that Holt Vane knew enough people in the territory to make silence on the matter costly. The $40 went into the household account, and the deficit closed before the first snow. Holt told her this on an evening in November, when the first real snow had come down off the peaks and covered the North Fork in the specific, committed silence of a mountain winter settling in for the duration. "Aldous paid," he said. "Good," she said. $40. "I thought it might be more," she said. "But 40 is reasonable." He looked at her across the table with the grey, direct eyes she had been reading for 6 weeks. "You've been managing this ranch since you arrived," he said. "Not just the house." "The house and the ranch are the same thing," she said. "They don't separate cleanly." "No," he said. "They don't." He was quiet for a moment. "My wife didn't see it that way. She saw the house as her part, and the range as mine, and the line between them as fixed." He turned his coffee cup. "I think she was right that it was fixed. I think she was wrong that it was the problem." Cora looked at him. "What was the problem?" "The North Fork," he said. "Not the line, the place itself. She was a woman who needed people around her. She needed a town and voices and the ordinary company of other women, and the North Fork doesn't have that, and I couldn't change the North Fork." He paused. "I could have gone somewhere she could have that. I didn't want to. I knew it then, and I know it now, and I don't have an argument for it, except that this land is the first thing I have ever been entirely sure about, and I could not make myself leave it." "And you're telling me this now because," Cora said. "Because you've been here 6 weeks," he said, "and you haven't mentioned the isolation once. You haven't mentioned town or other people or the quiet." He looked at her directly. "Most people mention the quiet." She thought about 11 years on her family's ranch, which had been a quiet of a different kind. The quiet of a woman who has learned not to speak because speaking produced no result. This quiet was not that. This quiet was a place she could hear herself think. "I grew up quiet," she said. "I know the difference between quiet that takes something from you and quiet that gives it back." He was still for a moment. Then, "Yes," he said. "That's exactly it." The threat arrived at Christmas. It arrived not from Hargrove or the new owner of the Beale Ranch, but from her brother Cal, who rode up the North Fork Road on a grey December morning with snow on his coat and the expression of a man who had drawn the short lot on an errand he did not want. He came to the cabin door, and she opened it. And they looked at each other, brother and sister who had grown up in the same house and understood each other in the specific, complicated way of siblings who have never entirely been on the same side. "Cora," he said. "Cal," she said. She stepped back from the door. He came in. He declined coffee, which meant he was not planning to stay, which meant whatever he had come to say was something he wanted to deliver and leave before she had time to respond. She had known Cal for 27 years and knew his tactics the way she knew weather. He said their father was ill. Not dying, she watched his face for that, and it was not there, but ill enough that the ranch management was suffering, and the new owner, Fenn, was dissatisfied with the transition. And Fenn's representative, Hargrove, had contacted their father to say that if the domestic situation was not stabilized before the first of the year, the sale terms would be revisited. Cal had come to ask her to come back. She listened to all of it. Then she said, "What exactly does stabilized mean?" Cal looked at the table. "Cal," she said. "Hargrove said the 8th paragraph provision is..." Cal stopped. He was not a bad man. She had spent 27 years being clear-eyed about this. He was not bad, he was weak, which was its own separate failure and one she had less patience for. But it was not the same thing. He said the provision is still in effect, and that if you returned voluntarily it would resolve. "No," she said. "Cora, no." She said it the way she had said most things in this house for 6 weeks plainly, without elevation. I have a position here. I have a wage and a roof and work that is mine in a way the Beale Ranch never was, because the Beale Ranch was yours and Papa's and I was in the 8th paragraph. She looked at her brother steadily. I'm sorry Papa is ill. I'll write to him. But I won't go back. Cal looked at his hands. He signed it because he needed the money, he said. The debt was, it was worse than I knew. Then he should have told me, she said. 11 years ago. 10 years ago. Any of the years I was keeping his books, and I might have helped him fix it before it required selling me along with the property. The word sat in the room. Cal looked up. In his face was the thing she had been waiting 11 years to see there. Not apology exactly, but acknowledgement. The moment when someone who has been looking away finally looks at what is there. You should have had the ranch, he said quietly. You ran it. Yes, she said. I did. A door opened behind her. She had not heard Holt come in from the range. She had been focused on Cal, but he was at the kitchen doorway in his coat with the cold still on him, looking at the room in a way that was absolutely still and absolutely attentive. Cal looked at him. Holt looked at Cal. She's told you no, Holt said. Not loudly. Not with the aggressive certainty of a man performing protection. Simply with the flat factuality of a man stating what had happened and indicating that it was complete. I heard her, Cal said. He did not argue it. Whatever fight he had come with, it had gone somewhere in the conversation with his sister, which she suspected he had not expected to go the way it had. He stood up. He looked at Cora. I'll tell him you're right. Yes, she said. He looked at her for another moment. He looked at the cabin, at the kitchen that was warm and tended, at the ledger on the shelf, at the specific quality of a space in which someone had been given room to be what they were. Something moved in his face. He put his hat on. He left. The door closed. The cabin was very quiet. Holt had not moved from the doorway. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with the grey eyes, the ones she had been reading for 2 months and had learned to read well. What was in them now was not relief or satisfaction or the particular expression of a man who had done a thing and wanted acknowledgement for it. It was something quieter, something that had been there for some time and was arriving, in this moment, at the surface. You didn't need me for that, he said. No, she said. But I'm glad I came in. So am I, she said. He came the rest of the way into the kitchen. He shrugged off his coat and hung it on the hook by the door, the familiar motion of a man returning to a place where he belongs. And she turned back to the stove, because supper was at a stage that required it, and the ordinary evening began its ordinary progress. And neither of them said what was going to be said next, because it was not the time, and they both understood that. The time came on a Sunday in January, when the snow had been on the ground for 6 weeks, and the North Fork was the quietest it had been since October, and he came in from feeding the cattle and stood in the kitchen for a moment not doing anything, which she had learned was always the prelude to something. She waited. He said, I want to tell you something, and I want to tell it right, and I want you to know that if you tell me it's not what you want, I'll hear that, and it won't change anything about the position or the arrangement. All right, she said. He said, the day you came around that bend I told you to stay, because I recognized something. I told you about my wife, about what I didn't say to her on the road, but that wasn't the whole of it. He was looking at the middle distance. The way he looked at things he was working through carefully. The whole of it was that you came around that bend with nothing. No coat, no bag, nothing, and your chin was level. You just had the ground taken out from under you, and you were walking like you knew where the next piece of ground was, even though you didn't. He paused. I wanted to know a person like that. I told you to stay because I wanted to know you. The fire in the grate made the only sound in the room. And now you know me, she said. Enough to know I want to keep knowing you, he said. He looked at her then, directly, with the full grey attention she had first seen on a mountain road in October. Stay, not as the housekeeper, as the person who knows where the ledger is, and how to argue with Aldous, and what the kitchen garden needs in March, and what the quiet on this fork is worth. He said her name. Stay as mine, if you're willing, on your own terms. The way this place works, the house and the range together, no line between them, that's what I want. With you. She looked at him. She thought about a Tuesday morning and an 8th paragraph and a road with no coat and a word said by a stranger who had turned out to be the least strange person she had met in 27 years. She thought about 6 weeks of ledgers and silences and a brother who had finally looked at the thing he had been not looking at, and the $40 from Aldous that had closed the deficit, and the kitchen garden's bones she had been planning for since October. She thought about the word he had used on the road. Stay, not as a command, as an invitation, as a question. Give it another day. Give me the chance to show you what this place is when you know it. She knew it now. Yes, she said, I'll stay. He let out a breath, not dramatically, just the breath of a man who had been holding something and had set it down. He nodded once, the nod that was his form of everything that other men said in many more words, and she accepted it in the spirit it was offered, which was completely. They were married in the spring, when the North Fork Road was passable, and the kitchen garden was in its first green, and the ledgers were balanced, and the cattle had come through the winter at full count. His sister came from Billings for the ceremony, and declared the match sensible and the cabin improved, both of which were accurate. Cal came, which she had not expected, and which cost him something she could see, and which she counted as the beginning of a different kind of accounting between them, one she intended to keep as carefully as any other. Her father wrote in February a letter that was short and not easy, and which said, among other things, that he was glad she had found a situation, which was not the same as an apology, but was, from Gerald Beale, a considerable distance in that direction. She wrote back. She said she was well. She said the North Fork suited her. She did not say more than that, because more than that was not yet what the situation held, and she was a woman who dealt in accurate numbers. What the numbers held in the years that followed was this: a ranch that moved from deficit to surplus in its first full year of joint management, documented in ledgers that were her work and acknowledged as such. A kitchen garden that became the North Fork's primary source of preserved goods by the 3rd year, with a reach that extended, by the 5th, to the Cutter Creek market that had never expected to see the Beale girls' work on its shelves. A life of the specific, grounded kind that grew from 2 people who had both spent years building in solitude and discovered, at a fork in a road, that what they had been building was half of something. On an October evening in the 3rd year of their marriage, she came around the bend in the North Fork Road on horseback. She had been to Cutter Creek for supplies, and found him standing at the fork where the South Road met the Bitterroot Trail, in almost exactly the place he had been standing on the day she had come around the corner with no coat and nothing in her hands. He was not going anywhere. He was just there. She pulled up. He looked at her. "What are you doing?" she said. "Waiting," he said. "For what?" He looked at her in the way he had looked at her the first time, the direct, particular attention of a man who has found what he was looking for and intends to keep it in sight. "Same thing as last time," he said. "I just know your name now." She looked at him for a long moment. The mountains were what they always were in October, cold and certain and paying no attention to either of them. The light was the low amber light of late afternoon that made the ridge look like something built from the inside. She dismounted and stood beside him at the fork. "It's cold," she said. "Yes," he said. He handed her his coat. She put it on. They stood at the fork for a while, the way they stood in most places, without needing it to be anything other than what it was, which was enough, which had always been enough, which, on a mountain road in October, with the smell of coming snow in the air and the amber light on the ridge and a man beside her who had said one word to a stranger and meant all of it, was more than enough. It was everything.